Well, g'day. Hello.
Good day. Hey, how you doing?
Very good, thank you. Right. Oh, well, let's get into this, James. Well, no, look,
Yep.
actually, I'll ask you first. So, how's your winter been? Have you
Dry.
really?
Yeah, really dry. So people are worried because it's normally wet. This is when we get our reservoirs back up, and so it's been kind of frightening. People are worried. There's hosepipe bans kind of still.
Wow.
Normally there's no hosepipe bans. There's been a hosepipe ban pretty much through the winter. The fountains are cut off in the villages.
Ah, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
And so, if it's mid-March, I guess it's still early enough that there might be a turnaround and you end up with a wet spring.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, fingers
yeah.
crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, we had a wet autumn, so October, November was kind of wet, and then it's just been dry, and yeah, it's frightening. So all the reservoirs are low. It's just unnerving. People are and last year we saw some trees die in the forests, so we're just like white oaks, the Quercus pubescens, is dying in the forests. So yeah, that's kind of unnerving.
Absolutely. We've had three what we know as La Nina years, which are three wetter years than normal in a row,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
expecting now that an El Nino, which is the opposite, is going to kick in. And then sometimes that lasts 6 or 7 years where it just gets drier and drier and drier, and it's so spooky. But right now, you've got to enjoy it while it's good, don't you? Because you never
yeah.
know how long it's going to last.
Yeah. So, well, in a way, for us, it's business wise, it's quite brilliant because people are starting, and I think environmentally wise, it's quite brilliant. People are really considering irrigation, considering what they're planting. They've stopped. Like the 1980s is finally over.
Yeah,
People,
yes.
yeah, even some of the Russians are thinking, oh, maybe we can't have lawn everywhere. Because the problem is South of France is full of people who can afford to do what they want, and so they
Yeah.
do. But now it's kind of shameful. So people are aware that they might be doing something out of political correctness, and it's kind of totally crazy because it's so dry. So yeah, there's a definite shift, which is nice.
Yeah, that just because you can thing has definitely shifted, hasn't it? And it's not just
Yeah.
fear of condemnation. I think that there is a widespread sense that there's a better way to do things, and that a green lawn is not necessarily going to be acknowledged as a status symbol anymore.
Yeah, green walls, yeah.
Mm. So, James, let's get started with this.
Yeah.
So James, you started out, or your real love is landscape painting. You thought you might be a
Yep.
landscape painter.
Yeah.
To what extent does landscape painting shape your work as a designer?
I think I'm the great joy of being a painter is you don't have to explain why you do it. So potentially people become painters because they can't put things into words. They're not they have trouble putting things into words. So I think my landscape painting affects my work in a uh, kind of a impressionism is a nasty is a dirty word, but an impressionistic kind of way. It's this sort of effect on choice of vegetation, effect on choice of tone, effect on choice of uh, depth, and kind of a softness. So anything that my definitely, if you looked at my landscape painting and you looked at my gardens, you'd say, yeah, there's a similarity. There's a whole lot more detail in the gardens because my paintings are pretty impressionistic. So, but the impression that landscape left on me is definitely impressed upon in my garden work. And so yeah, I think you can see it if you put the two things together and you made the gardens a little bit fuzzy, a little bit out of focus, you'd see the same thing.
Yeah, right, right. Do you think your work, as a consequence of that, differs from other designers?
Definitely. I think my great strength is my self confidence, and my self confidence isn't something which is uh, overtly obvious, I don't think, but it's a deep love of what I see and do. And so it means that my work has a confidence, and it always has a confidence. And I think that's come from the painting too. So when I'm doing a painting or looking at a landscape or walking a landscape, I have a deep appreciation of it, and I have a deep love for that translation in my work. So it means that my work has its own character, and it's not. I think everyone has that opportunity, but a lot of people potentially are quite unsure of themselves, and I don't have that. I'm very sure of myself. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. But I so do you think that then the landscape painting has allowed you, in a sense, to nurture that confidence and to develop that confidence to fine tune your eye in a way that practice as a landscape designer would never allow you, just simply because of the how many concepts you can explore on a piece of watercolor paper, for instance, compared to the canvas that is a garden, a client's garden.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, when you, almost at the moment I'm only drawing. I don't even think I'm painting, but I do think it's a 20-minute thing. You look at it, you do it, you move on, and if it's bad, it doesn't matter. And that's very refreshing, because of course in a garden, when they're paying you thousands of euros to do a nice job and it's got to last for a long time, you maybe you should be more hesitant. I'm definitely not, though. I think that potentially sketch tone practice is how I approach the everyday. I think gardens in a way are more punishing and more forgiving. Gardens, they're made of nuts and bolts and concrete and all sorts of things, so they're more technical. But in the end, you can garden them, and it's through the gardening that makes them really good or really not good. So I think painting is done and it's finished, whereas a garden is never done, and so that working and working and working is what makes it really brilliant. So there's that. There's the quick sketch stage, the hard grind, and then the years of making it good. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you know, I'd like to add in there, it probably won't end up in the final cut, but I'd like to add that my perception of you is that alongside this confidence, and in fact, I think it's probably to some extent validating your confidence, is a humility. I mean, when I watched that Mediterranean Garden Society YouTube video that's up there, that the talk that you did with Mediterranean Garden Society, you had a gardener alongside with you because you were comfortable enough with the idea that I'm really good at this bit, but I need a bit of input from someone else there. And I love that when someone is so confident in that part that they're good at, that they know that there's room for them to acknowledge areas where it isn't necessarily their strength.
Yeah, I think it's we're lucky if we're able to do that. Then we've got so many brilliant people around us, like the mason, the builders, the plants people, the nursery people, all that kind of knowledge. What a joy! And it's potentially what I enjoyed most about the Chelsea Flower Show was all those people are in the same room at the same time for the same 2 weeks, and so you get this kind of massive energy of passion and obsession, and kind of all those people are doing it for 2 weeks, so it's like a huge fix. Whereas our practice is talking to nurserymen, talking to builders, stonemasons, and that that sharing is kind of potentially what makes our work better and better.
Yeah, wow.
Mm.
So I'm interested. I mean, I come from a science background. You come from
Yeah.
an art background, and my nature is to want to distill things back into principles. And maybe that says something more about my science background and maybe I shouldn't inflict that on other people. Yeah, but that's what I'm going to do anyway. I'm just interested in knowing what you perceive to be possibly the single biggest value you hold for your gardens, or if it, in another way of asking that, the single strongest or most evident principle of design that people would see in your gardens.
I think the first word comes to mind is relaxed. I think um, maybe it's through confidence, maybe it's through. I think what I like about landscape is this kind of un. Um, it's a kind of relaxed quality. In nature does it naturally, right? So it's very relaxed. So you walk into a landscape and everything kind of works, and that's really a relief. Because if you go into a garden and everything's kind of uptight, and if there's one lavender dead in the field of lavenders, it's really upsetting, and before long it's quite stressful. So I think potentially my work is quite relaxed. So of course that doesn't suit everyone because it can be a bit messy. But I think the people who appreciate my work are the people who enjoy that relaxed state. It's like it's not too precious. Much as I'm obsessed and I want to make it as good as possible, if nature doesn't take a hold and take over and somehow impress itself upon what we've done, then it's only half a job. You know, it's that energy of naturalness, which I think is that kind of relaxed tone. And I think that's what people want from me.
Well, I think we can probably distill that further back because I'm really interested in um, what actually induces a sense of relaxation in a garden. As you
Yeah.
say, it's clearly not over controlled.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, the principle. We'll distill that right down. What are the things then that best communicate relaxation?
Nice question.
Well, I mean, for me, I look at and you know, I don't mean to just like put you under the
That's
grill,
good.
but
I like
I mean, for
yeah.
me, it's certainly about a balance between a sense of control and of nature having some sense of control, but also man having some as well, because there does need to be some sense of the hand of man, doesn't there, for most of us with gardens to feel comfortable and to feel
Yeah.
relaxed.
Yeah,
If
true.
we
Yeah.
feel like this thing is just going completely crazy, that's not relaxing.
Yeah, that's not relaxing though. Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to then think about what it is that fundamentally communicates relaxation.
So yeah, it's true. If I've got quite a few English clients and they're gardeners by nature. And so if they walk out into the garden, they start pulling weeds whilst talking to me. You know, they can't help. You know, I'm standing there looking at the view, and they're on their hands and knees pulling weeds because they can't help themselves. So you could say that's disturbing them, so they have to feel like they do it. Or the practice of weeding is what they find relaxing. So there's this gray line, right? It's not a clean line where when they turn up, the garden must be clean, there must be no weeds, then they feel relaxed, then they can sit down and have a glass of wine. That's not quite that's not quite how they are. They like most of my clients like to be in a garden where they are part they're part of the garden. Their practice of gardening is their relaxation. Of course, at some point they sit and have a glass of rosé, but they're if it was a complete crazy mess and they arrive and they just don't know how to manage it, then of course it's a disaster. That's not relaxing. If there's enough of nature creeping around that they feel like they're allowed to touch it, because there's some gardens you go in and you say, I wouldn't dare do anything, right? So there's this, I guess there's this, so it's got to be something to do with ownership. A client has to feel like they own it. And that ownership is, I mean, of course, everyone's different. So some people might want that ownership of this formal, grand, imposing, dramatic landscape that they can say, I am this. And that's how they find, I'm not sure that's how I find it relaxing. I think that's something completely different. And that's not my clients. But my clients, I think they feel once they take an ownership by weeding, by being part of the process, that's a sense of relaxation. So there is I think that relaxation is communication. There's a communication with the garden instead of
Right.
it being I mean I totally get that message of, you know, it has to be man-made a bit, otherwise you feel like you're just in the middle of a hot mess, no good. So there is this kind of balance, and that balance is through gardening and having a gardener potentially to help you if you're not there full time, which is most of my clients. But that gardening being just enough and not too much and not too little. I think the gardener is what makes it.
Yeah. So do you think that that sense of that collaboration between you as the initial visionary and then them as the nurturer is a really central value in what you do?
Yeah, and the gardener, so that that whole communication and that our good gardens, the only ones I would ever show anyone are the ones where the client gets their fingers dirty. The gardener is a mate, someone we talk to a lot, and we stay involved. Now, financially or not financially, we stay involved because we want to be involved in that evolution. And it's of course it's the evolution which is interesting. The rest is not so interesting. It's that how it where it goes is what's really cool.
So what are the elements then? I'll start that again. Cut that rubbish out in the middle there. Um, I mean, I'll just start. I'll just start with a clean question. I mean, um, I assume then that that idea of relaxation is something that you can communicate to a client and immediately get them to engage with that value and can see the value in that. In that they share this perception that yes, I want it to be a relaxing space and to look and feel relaxed. Are there any things that you have to build into a garden, not just elements, but I guess design principles that they're never going to actually acknowledge the value of this, but I have to put it in?
Mm.
That there's almost no point. No clients ever really understood when I've tried to explain this to them about what's going to be built into their garden or the thinking behind the design of this garden. They're never going to understand it, but I know I have to do it anyway.
I think time. So we plant a lot of plants that we don't tell the client, because if we said this plant costs you 20 euros planted, so not crazy money, but it won't be really any interest until 10 years time. That's just not their thing. They don't get that. They want, I mean, most clients of course want instant gratification, and that can be 5 years. That's quite instant, but 10 years is, they may have moved on. So we plant a lot of plants that we don't tell the client. So our process and our planting is all about this evolution, and a lot of our plants won't evolve until 10 years. Like Juniperus foinacea. It's this deep, dark mass of a shrub, but it's supersonic slow. And in time, we want our gardens, maybe this planting to evolve into some sort of shrub landscape with an understory of interest. But we can't mention that to the client. We've got one client where we planted Pistachio lentiscus. That will be interesting in 5 years' time. And the Juniperus will be interesting in another 10 years' time. So that's a hard thing to communicate.
Wow, yeah, because it feels to me like certainly relatively new to my thinking, and it seems like the acceptance of gardens being evolutionarily and building in that evolution seems to be a relatively new concept. But
Yeah,
to,
I think
at
so.
least, it might be something you've been designing with for a long time, but in a broad concept, this idea that we don't have a fixed position that we're targeting that we're going to reach in 3 years' time, and the challenge then is to keep it at that place. We feel we're really moving on from that. So it
Yeah.
would seem, and that's so interesting to me that in that case, that there's going to be possible sort of surprises for your clients in 10 years' time that you never told them about.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully surprises they tell me about, instead of me telling them about, that they, because they're part of that process, then they start the feedback loop is from the client and from the gardener, because of course there'd be a whole lot of failures too. So maybe the juniperus dies after 2 years and it was a complete disaster, but then Pistachio terebinthus becomes this huge tree in the garden instead of staying a shrub, which is what I thought it would do. So that that process, in inviting people to join the process, the client, the gardener, and I think that process we talk about in our presentation, but I'm not sure they really get it, except for the really good gardeners. And the good gardeners still, it's like a seasonal, temporal timing they get. They don't get the annual one, that kind of growth thing, or complete change of landscape from prairie to shrubland to maybe woodland, or keep it to shrubland. That evolutionary process is too far ahead, and a lot of people sell their house before the garden gets there.
Just yesterday, I read in a book about these ideas of different temporalities, and I'd never heard that term before, of temporalities. And one of the things I love, we have a huge big oak tree in my garden, and I love the fact that it marks the centuries. It's probably 150 years old. It marks the decades, and it marks the passing of the light in a single day. That all these temporalities all sit in one single unit, or one single element in the garden. And it really feels to me like gardens do that so well, celebrating concurrent temporalities. But there's just not enough talked about with that, is there? It's all seems to be just about moments, the celebration of a moment, and then trying to maintain a particular moment for as long as possible.
Yeah, back to landscape painting in a way. Pictures, there's this like picture. Here's the master garden designer's made this picture, and it must always stay like that. It's that control. I guess we come from quite a controlled, historically controlled landscape view, and now we're entering a period where we are celebrating change and evolution and huge fluctuations and changes, and that takes quite a lot of confidence, quite a lot of understanding. Maybe scientifically we're getting closer to understanding, and of course lots of designers working with ecology, so they're really working in a complex scientific way, and that potentially allows them to be a bit more relaxed, or they throw 100 species in when they really only want 30 in the end, because they're going to allow that to evolve into something. And all that kind of practice is really exciting, and we're learning a lot at the moment, I think.
And it really goes back to this idea that a good garden designer is also going to be partly an ecologist as well, and certainly have some real horticultural virtuosity going there as well. So if you were teaching garden design to other people, you were sitting down explaining to them that all gardens need to contain or need to acknowledge the following, let's say, 3 principles. I know it's stupid. There's got to be, I don't know, actually, there's probably no more than about 7 or 8 that I think are really fundamental.
Yeah.
But what are the central teachings to you if you were teaching garden design to someone else?
I guess I think I would start with atmosphere. So what's that quality you'll want to bring to the design? What quality of space does the client want? What do you bring as a designer? What atmosphere are you wanting to deal with, express? Then, of course, spatially, we talk very horticultural at the moment. We're all, especially me and probably you and most of like really obsessed with flowers and stuff, but really spatially, how are we going to deal with that spatially so we really feel like we're part of that landscape? I think it's that relationship. How wide are the paths? Do the paths do you have to push through the vegetation to get to the seating area, or does it need lots of space? What's your relationship with nature going to be in that garden? So there's how are you going to communicate with the garden? And I think that's spatial, width of path, size of seating areas, density of vegetation, clean empty space or very busy space. All that stuff is kind of your relationship. So there's atmosphere, then your relationship with the garden. I think that's spatial. And then I think I would say my third one is the temporal thing, this gardening thing, this involvement. So a designer should never be far from what is the maintenance of that garden going to be? What's the relationship of the client going to be? What's the relationship of the gardener going to be with that space? Those for me, when I off the top of my head, throwing it straight out there, the three main principles come to my head first.
Well, personally, I love them. I mean, I love that.
Mm.
I'm forever saying to people, gardens succeed or fail on how well they capture and manipulate space. That, you know, that
Yeah,
spatial,
yeah,
the space thing. Forget which plants you're going to use and all that.
yeah,
Let's just work
yeah,
out how this contains me and directs me and holds me and exposes me and, you know, all that
yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So then I'm really interested in how different it is when you're designing a Chelsea garden. If
Hmm.
you were teaching people about the three most important things in a Chelsea garden,
Yeah.
how different are they?
Yeah, well, Chelsea is not a garden because people don't go in it. So spatially, it's kind of course, you have to feel like there's space, that you could imagine yourself in the space. Otherwise, it's not really a garden as far as I'm concerned. Um, but that spatial thing is much more a visual effect. It's like I mean, the judges come in, so it's very important that when they're in the garden, they feel like they're in a garden. So there is a spatial value. Um, but if when I approached a show garden, the first thing is drama. The first thing is like, what is going to make, you know, what can I pull out, which is going to be just époustouflante in French, that's just going to blow your mind. What's the most dramatic? It could be very soft and romantic, but what is that? The most dramatic essence of this landscape, which I can express. What's just going to stop you in your tracks and go, oh, and stick in your mind. So that definitely the first thing is drama.
Mm.
And I guess drama in gardens is obviously an interesting thing, but you live with them a long time. Whereas in Chelsea, you walk past them and you may give them 10 minutes of your time. So they've got to be pretty bold, pretty strong, very uncompromised, no compromise. Spatially, so I think, yeah, then spatially probably does come back because of that. You've got to feel like you could be part of that space. Like you imagine you're in there and you're affected by the space, even if you can't really go in. But you're being judged by people who go in, so you really have to make that work. Um, I can't think of the third one. I think that's it: drama
Yeah,
and volume,
yeah.
that space.
I think I love the space thing because to me, and it's really proving itself to me time and time again in something like Instagram, where what you are communicating is a three-dimensional truth in a two-dimensional medium, and
Yeah.
that what you need to be able to do, and I notice this in likes on my own images, that if you can feel like you could project yourself into this image, you know where you would
Mm-hmm.
sit or where you would stand if you were in that image.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how much more engaging that
Uh-huh.
is.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
And that if you just see a photo of planting, you just go, yeah,
Yeah.
it's, that's pretty. But if you can
Mm.
project yourself into it, and to
Mm.
me, it comes back to that book, The Poetics of Gardens, that I only sought out from MIT, that I sought out about 20 years ago, having read Michael Pollan's uh, Second Nature, his very first book, Second Nature. But yeah, I from the bibliography, I bought this book, and throughout this book are these tiny little pencil sketches or pen sketches with just maybe a little cluster of trees, or
Mm.
maybe a view, but somewhere in them is a little director's chair, just sketched
Uh-huh.
in the lightest way. But
Uh-huh.
because it gives you somewhere to land in that photo,
Uh-huh.
in that image, the little
Yeah.
pen drawing, simplest pen drawing ever, you
Mm.
you inhabit every one of those little images,
Mm.
and
Very nice.
and as you say, with a Chelsea garden, it's rough because it can't just be 2D, because you do have to make sure the judges feel convinced when they're in there. But for everybody else, it's just about, oh, imagine if got to sit in there. And
Mm.
it needs to
Yeah.
be sufficiently enticing. And in
Yeah.
one sense, I think that's probably quite an important value, even in our gardens, even in the real gardens that we design, is that ability to project yourself in, like if you're sitting inside looking out of a window at a view, you need to be able to sort of go, oh, what would that be like? I
Mm,
would love to step out in that, you know?
mm,
And likewise, when you look from one area of a garden into the next, that really important aspect of being able to project yourself in and go, oh, I need to go in and feel what that's really like, you know?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would often place tables and chairs and seating in the garden. Not, we don't really place sculpture, but we would definitely place seating objects or table objects as part of the picture. And maybe it's when you sit there, it's not as good as it looks, but it does draw you in. So we definitely use that as a tool to as like a trick maybe, but it's as a tool to sort of bring people in. But it's very until you've talked about it, it's kind of, I guess it's a bit subliminal. We do it because yeah, but you're right. That's why we're doing it. We're doing it because we want to paint that picture of being in the garden, even if when you're not in the garden. It's the same as Chelsea and the same in real life. We do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of humanizing.
Yeah.
It's humanizing, but it also is this projected inhabiting projection of inhabitation um, that is so powerful. Yeah.
Mm, mm, I guess
Yeah.
video also helps, for that. Videos, we see a lot of people videoing. Once you video, instead of this kind of one single image, you video. Of course, gardeners just speak so much better over time, even if that time is just a short clip of video. But you certainly join in to a garden space through video because there's so many things. You can't get the smell, but you get the sounds and you get the movement and you get the light and the changing, and that complexity is really, great photographers do a good job, but video is really amazing for that.
Yeah, the tiniest movement
Yeah.
fills in a whole lot of three dimensionality
Mm,
that a 2D still can never provide. You know that
yeah.
when you move something and something, you move a camera and the things near to you move at a different pace than the things far away, and instantly you start
You're
creating
in.
a 3D matrix. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Mm,
So your work is nearly all in a kind of arid setting, or comes from an inherent aridity. And
mm.
I'm just wondering to what extent you feel like that dictates the design process, if it does at all, because in some ways maybe it doesn't. You know, when you, as you say, if it's spatially that those three key values that you just talked about actually would be just as strong in any environment. But what
Mm.
do you think designing in a dry environment does to the design process? How does it change the way you think about the design?
I think landscape experience. So my landscape experience is walking in this dry, arid landscape, generally quite poor, potentially a little bit barren. So atmosphere first, atmosphere. Um, I come with a whole lot of baggage. I've got a lot on my back already. So I bring that dry. It is my paint palette. It is my materiality. It's my bag of tricks. That all those things I've learned through looking at landscape is what I bring to a process, a garden design process. But it's if you looked at my paintings, they're all painted with the same three colors. If you look at my landscapes, they're all painted with the same three materials, pretty much. I definitely bring a uh, a landscape with me on my back, and that landscape is what dictates the atmosphere. So I come with atmosphere, I think. So people potentially ask me to do a garden because of the atmosphere. I'm kind of already got on my back. So that's kind of you could say that's a style thing. Style is also quite of a dirty word between designers. In a way, you should have no style. You can do anything with anything, and potentially we can when we take into a different landscape. But when we're working our landscape and with our baggage, then we're bringing often the same style. So there's a style. Then spatially, I think spatially is really cool. It's a cool way of looking at how we approach our designs um, from this dry landscape. Dry landscapes they've got lots of space in them. You can walk through them. And gardens are obviously brilliant if you can be in them. If you're in a bramble field and you can't get into the bramble field, it's not much of a garden, but most of these landscapes we walk in feel like gardens in themselves without any real maintenance. There may be sheep that maintain them, but there's this spatial value that I think we bring to the gardens, and that's because of the dryness, because of the poorness.
I just think I'm so fascinated by that. I think it's something that's so rarely discussed is that balance of or of the trade-off with the verdancy that so many of us from dry climates, but particularly those of us with an Anglo heritage, can crave the kind of verdancy of English gardens and gardening, and
Yeah,
yet there is something there, the clarity of a beautifully designed garden, kind of arid garden, where there is all that space between plants,
yeah,
as well as almost invariably a much lower sense of canopy,
yeah.
often quite limited canopy.
Mm, mm,
Um, oh golly, I just love that. That just
mm.
unlocks so much for me.
Yeah, yeah. And so we come with that sort of style, I guess, those colors and tones and textures and all that stuff, and we come with that spatial appreciation of natural landscape. And so then we're basically mm, we bring a whole lot of dry with us, but part of that dry is the space. And that's a really, it's so nice to walk in these landscapes because you can. That's a real treat coming from, wet England, where if there's not a whole lot of sheep, you can't get through it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And look, to take the pressure off the need to avoid a style, I would suggest that it's more that you come with a language than you come with a style. That
Yeah.
that you are. It's perfectly acceptable to go. I might try various styles in my only language, which is English, when I'm writing or speaking, but it's
Mm.
always going to come back to the language. I bring that language with me, and that's what it feels to me is so similar in your landscape painting, and then what I see in your work as well
Mm.
is a language of incredible um, discipline or restraint. Yeah.
I think restraints come with age. I think it's I think my gardens have become simpler. I remember Dan Pearson once saying, his restraint is what he kind of is attracted to, that kind of restraint. Of course, when you look at Dan's garden, there's I don't know how many thousands of varieties of plants, and he's obviously not very restrained at all. But I think we're all us plant obsessives are completely drawn to complexity and diversity, and it's not restrained.
Yeah.
We go to a plant fair and we've got to have one. Um, so restraints come with age, I think, because after a while, um, nature develops restraint. So the older the garden, the more restrained they become. Fortunately, they get pared back. Those stars that you had to have actually died out because they weren't really right for the garden. And so that I think that restraint comes with time. Yeah.
And it comes with maturity in a way that my conviction is that the only simplicity that I love in almost any art form is the simplicity that's on the far side of a whole lot of complexity and learning,
Yeah.
not the simplistic nature of someone starting off and just going, okay, I have to start with 3 plants. You
Yeah.
know, when you choose 3 plants for a garden, they're going to be the best 3 plants, that this thing is going to be so well thought through because you've lived with these things for, you know,
Years.
decades.
Yeah.
And
Decades.
and so whereas that same decision by a beginner is not going to be anywhere near as informed as what that restraint is going to be for someone who's played with plants all their life.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we're getting old, Michael.
No, ain't no doubt about it, mate. Oh dear. In an email exchange, you were talking about gardens full of gravel, which is you do use a lot of gravel in your gardens. That there is
Yeah,
a tendency towards things looking very, and to quote you, very mineral and mean.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm really interested. I I was in a garden. Did you visit any? I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to. It's typical McCoy. I can't ask something straight. I have to go backwards instead of forwards in my question. When you were in Australia, did you go and see any of the gardens of Fiona Brockhoff? When you
No.
no, okay,
We really wanted to, we
right,
saw some of her work and thought, oh, we'd love to see that, but we didn't get to. No, no.
right.
Yeah,
I was in one of Fiona Brockhoff's gardens a few weeks ago, and
yeah,
it was open to the public. There was a whole lot of people there, and I'm walking through, just going, how is it that she can get away with? She's right on the coast. I mean, you walk 100 meters down, you're on the beach from her place. So, and there's this kind of snaky trunked, somewhat stunted trees, classic coastal poor soils, all the rest of it. And there was just in many places there was bare mulch underneath these plants. Now,
uh-huh.
mostly she's got beautiful combinations of clipped Westringias and so perfectly crisp domes against beautiful kind of windswept grasses, Australian native grasses and things. So and
Mm.
but there were whole areas of bare mulch. And I'm just looking at
Yeah.
this going, how come she can get away with this in this kind of austere, low nutrient, low verdancy setting? It looks perfectly appropriate.
Mm.
Whereas where I garden, we get about 700 mils of rain or so, and it's much richer volcanic soils. And there's an inherent verdancy that precludes ever having, that kind of bare ground visible.
Mm.
And I'm just really interested in your question about mineral and mean, looking very mineral and mean. And at what point in the spectrum does suddenly having bare soil and the kind of space that you're talking about become acceptable? Where in the rainfall and verdancy spectrum? I know it
Yeah.
happens, but it's a really interesting thing. Now I know
I
we
think
chat
you
about
answered.
this in an email, but yeah,
Yeah, I think you answered your question though. I think, she is in a mean environment, so there's not much vegetation. And so if you've got empty space, it totally feels right. Whereas if you have empty space in your garden, it feels wrong because something would grow. Thomas Rayner talked about landscape memory, and landscape memory is like this: what does that landscape want to be? What's inherent in that, in the ground? What's the seed bank? What should it be? And if you work outside that landscape memory, you're just going to have a fight on your hands the rest of your lives trying to keep that memory down because it's so strong. And so, of course, in Fiona's gardens, in that garden, it's poor. So bare space is totally all right, but in your garden, it's not poor. So bare space is not all right. So I think I think that's it. And of course, we're working luckily in very poor environment, but we do often make that mistake. We're often working actually in quite agricultural soil, and we've got this kind of issue, problem that we really like this poor stuff, but we're bringing it to potentially quite a rich soil, and then we create the battle. So I definitely think our work is going to go towards uh, less mineral. One, because the mineral thing is environmentally potentially questionable because we're shipping a whole lot of material, and two, that the real landscape memory of that garden is probably not that. We've kind of got this preconceived thing, what we love on the mountain and what we produce in the garden. And we're lucky in some of our projects, we really are working in poor soils, but often we're not. And at that point, are we being really honest? And I think that the more honest we get, the more experience we get, the more able we'll be able to produce that, because it's harder. I think the minerals thing is much easier. And now I think we're going to a period of looking for solutions in a richer soil, even if it's dry, which means potentially lots of vegetation. And then in the summer, a lot of death.
yeah. I just love the fact that you see you see the poor soil areas as being particularly blessed. I just, that's so good. Like, as someone who was a traditional horticulturist of trying to add manure and compost to
Yeah,
everything, and, you know, I
yeah,
just love the fact that that this is now, that concept is starting to catch on. That
yeah.
to work honestly with your soil and to
Mm,
accept the restraint and the austerity that goes with either arid or low nutrient conditions is
mm.
is a design advantage.
Yeah, I think, and also we're not looking now at what is the most beautiful plant, but what's the best survivor? You know, what looks best when it's survived, instead of what looks best after having babied it, what looks best after having abandoned it. You know, that's the change. And so we still want a beautiful garden, but it's a beautiful garden that survives instead of a beautiful garden that's nurtured, even if we are, of course, caring and gardening and those things. There's this survival beauty instead of it being um, Olivier Philippe talks about plants that will survive 3 months drought. He doesn't talk about if it looks good. So
Mm.
it may look dreadful after 3 months, but it survives. And so, you know, that survival language, especially in poor environments with survival strategy plants being the kind of more dominant, then what are the best looking survivors, not what are the best looking flowers.
Well, we've got to get Helena onto this, don't we? You know, this has got to be
We
part of
do.
her data. And I know we've talked about this before, but it's really clarifying for me, this idea that what we need to do is have a graph of optimal conditions and a line down to seriously suboptimal. Which are the
Mm,
plants that continue to perform at an acceptable level, that don't
yeah,
drop as fast
yeah,
as the, you know, in their performance as the conditions would suggest,
yeah,
and that still perform at a more than acceptable level, even if they're only performing at 50% of optimum.
yeah, yeah. That, I mean, and so Felipe's solution is evergreen shrubs.
Mm.
Mediterranean gardens should be made of evergreen shrubs because they basically look all right, but they're not the natural landscapes memory solution in a lot of our gardens. A lot of that landscape memory is grassland, thistleland, and so that's right at the bottom of that graph. You know, look pretty dreadful pretty quickly. So and so I guess there's the client. You know, what's the client going to accept? When is the client going to accept it looking good because they want it in the summer, but the summer's obviously the toughest time. And then how do we work within landscape memory, but using the plants that, you know, is it a question of our appreciation, or is it a question of how good they look? Like pistachio lentisca is always looking perfect in any landscape, you know, even in the middle of summer, compared to, you know, Acantharium camagrostis, which just dries out to nothing in the middle of summer. You know, I'm a bit. We're looking to try and move away from pistachio and go to more towards that kind of landscape memory vegetation. But at the moment, that means changing our client's mind about what is beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a task.
It's
Well, thank you so much, James. That's just so fantastic.
always nice to see your smiling face, Michael.
Likewise. And so, yeah, thank you. Your wisdom, and your ability to talk through the way you're thinking in this climate is just so applicable to us here in Australia. And just thank you so much.
Pleasure.